Hi, everyone. This is Rob Doggett from the International Yeats Society and the State University of New York at Geneseo, and I'm here today with Margaret Mills Harper. How you doing, Meg?
Hey, Rob. Very well. How are you?
It's good to see you. So you are a Glucksman Professor in Contemporary Writing at the University of Limerick. And I first met you when you were director of the Yeats International Summer School. You've also been the past president of the International Yeats Society. And you are, as everyone watching this knows, a tremendous Yeats scholar who focuses in particular on a vision. And your book, Wisdom of Two, about Yeats's collaboration with his wife, George. And you've edited editions of a vision and written countless articles on it. So I'm glad to have you here. And we're going to talk about Byzantium, which is, I'm not sure why we're doing this. This is
neither.
This is tough stuff. But before we get into the poem, just give you a chance to talk about anything you're working on now. Any scholarship going on that you want to mention?
Well, it's kind of, I feel very bold, but I'm actually writing a book that is only semi-scholarly. I'm trying to keep it from getting overly scholarly. I'm writing about the house I live in, which I really love. And I've so far written about a third of it and gotten sidetracked into various other things, but it's back on the agenda soon. So.
I visited you once there, and I it was the most unique house I think I've ever been to in Ireland, with so much history and sort of idyllic setting there, and it's just beautiful. So
yeah, it is a great place, and I feel really lucky to be able to live here. And I can honestly say, oh, it's great, it's wonderful, because I just rent the house, so there's not a claim being made, you know.
Right. Well, so Byzantium, and when I put out the call for people to talk about some poems, you came back with Byzantium. And I think you wrote "gulp" in parentheses. You were going to talk about it. So why did you pick this one?
I've been wondering just that in these last couple of weeks. Partially, I think, for the challenge of it, to be honest. This is, to me, the hardest Yeats poem. It's the one that resists me the most. You know, by the time it ends, I'm in a kind of maelstrom of images and words, and I don't know what's happening. But for some reason I love it, and I also really like the poems. I don't think Yeats was often kind of overwhelmed by miracle, you know, as he calls it one place. I think he liked the idea of mystics and religious ecstasy, but he wasn't really a mystic or a person given to ecstasy. But there are a couple of poems where the poem itself sort of enacts something beyond the intellect, beyond his ability to think, beyond words' ability to say, and yet it's in words and in thought. And this one, to me, is a poem like that. It just, it's a mystery. You know, it is itself the mystery that it talks about.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's so many of his poems where that are performative, but they're the sort of public utterances, and you get the sense of the speaker as being fully in control, and, you know, I declare kind of things.
Yeah.
And in this poem, it's about, you know, you get the sense of pushing toward the limits of language, the limits of art, like how can art represent that kind of mystery?
Yeah.
The other thing for me that's interesting, you know, I'm sure this is going to come up, is when I first got serious about studying Yeats, when I came across Byzantium, I immediately went to a vision, and I thought, well, okay, I hadn't known much about a vision. You know, I was an undergrad, people didn't talk about it, and I started to learn a little bit about it in grad school. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll go to a vision, and a vision is going to help me out here. And then you go there, and you're like, first of all, I don't half the time I don't know what he's talking about in a vision, and second of all, the Byzantium sections don't really match up. There's no, I'm like,
they don't. You know, that's probably one of the, I mean, given that I think about a vision a lot, that's probably one of the things that I wanted, one of the things that draws me to this poem is there's a famous passage in a vision that I'm sure you know, where he basically says, if I could have had the choice to live at any point in history or around the world, I would have chosen Byzantium during the reign of Justinian and Theodora. And, you know, I imagine that there would be this kind of synthesis of the material world and the spiritual world. And, you know, taxi drivers would be willing to talk about great literature kind of thing, you know, and I'd be in a little wine shop and I could kind of see that wine shop, you know, and he's having some conversation with some, you know, guy who's a construction worker who wants to talk about the progress of the soul, you know.
Yeah.
But the poem doesn't feel like that, you know. He'd been really, really sick, nearly died right before he wrote this poem. And he says that he wrote the poem to kind of warm himself back into life, but it is not a warm poem.
No.
And it's not a poem about life, really. I mean, or, you know, in any simple sense, being alive, you know?
Mm.
So what, you know, if he loves this place so much, why is it so tortured?
Mm.
You know?
And you do have, and that, I think the entire volume, The Winding Stair, I mean, that sort of awareness of death, his serious illness, really haunts a lot of these poems. And
it does.
as you're saying, like that, the strangeness of the ending of Byzantium, the dolphin torn, the Kong tormented. See what a strange.
I often tell my students, I am like, when I got my first job, there I was, a brand new person, you know, at work, and nervous about everything. And we had, you know, on staff, a pretty well-known poet and nice guy. And he was trying, I'm sure he was trying to be pleasant. And he came up to me one day and, you know, he knew I worked on Yeats, and he said, so what on earth is going on at the end of Byzantium? And I thought, I don't know. You know? And I still don't know. I have really no idea. Although, I mean, I have lots of ideas, but they don't cohere, you know?
I was reading somewhere that when they were illustrating, the person who was illustrating an edition of The Winding Stair imagined all humanity on the back of one big dolphin.
Oh yeah, that was Sturge Moore. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Yeats wrote to Moore and sort of said, you know, he's the guy that did the cover for The Tower.
Right. Yes.
And he said, you know, I'll do, you know, can you do this cover? And so, yeah, Moore asked, you know, how big is this dolphin?
All right. Well,
the volume was gonna at one point be called, the volume of Winding Stair, you know, was gonna be called Byzantium at one point.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, which explains why all of the images, or the great majority of the images on the cover of the book, come from this poem. They're flames and the cockerel.
Well, let's have you read it, and I will share my screen. See if I can do this correctly. Hopefully you'll see it. Now, do you see that? Do you see the poem?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay, good. All right, here we go.
Okay. Byzantium. The unpurged images of day recede. The emperor's drunken soldiery are abed. Night resonance recedes. Night walker's song after great cathedral gong. A starlit or a moonlit dome disdains all that man is, all mere complexities, the fury and the mire of human veins. Before me floats an image, man or shade, shade more than man, more image than a shade. For Hades' bobbin, bound in mummy cloth, may unwind the winding path. A mouth that has no moisture and no breath, breathless mouths may summon. I hail the superhuman. I call it death in life and life in death. Miracle, bird or golden handiwork, more miracle than bird or handiwork, planted on the starlit golden bough, can like the cocks of Hades crow, or by the moon embittered, scorn aloud in glory of changeless metal, common bird or petal, and all complexities of mire or blood. At midnight on the emperor's pavement, flit flames that no faggot feeds, nor steel has lit, nor storm disturbs, flames begotten of flame, where blood-begotten spirits come and all complexities of fury leave, dying into a dance, an agony of trance, an agony of flame that cannot singe a sleeve. A straddle on the dolphin's mire and blood, spirit after spirit. The Smithies break the flood, the golden Smithies of the emperor. Marbles of the dancing floor break bitter furies of complexity. Those images that yet fresh images beget, that dolphin torn, that gong tormented sea.
Thanks, Meg. That's great.
Such a great poem.
It is such a great poem. So, as we were saying, it's so it sticks with you, even though you don't. It's difficult to understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah,
It sort of resonates.
yeah, exactly. I was thinking, Yeats also isn't often sort of determinedly vague or enigmatic. You can usually pin down what he's talking about, even if the meaning is goes in lots of different directions. And this one, it's really very difficult to pin down even what is going on here. I mean, like I was looking at critics, and a number of very wise people who've thought about this poem think that the dolphins are coming, and some of them think the dolphins are leaving. Where are those dolphins? What? Auden thought the gong was a terrible idea.
Yeah, that was the famous one, right? Like this idea of like, how does a gong torment the sea, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is the gong? Is it out on the sea? Is it on, is it on land? Where? Yeah.
Yeah. I got kind of bent or hammered into a funny shape thinking about golden smithies this week. A smithy can't actually be made out of gold, which is what golden smithy means. Gold is way too soft and metal, and you use gold in very small quantities if you are hammering gold, if you're actually beating gold. So there's a kind of swirling, you get kind of lost. I mean, Yeats uses words like phantasmagoria to describe being lost amid seas of images. And there's almost a feeling like that, like the hammered gold becomes the thing that is doing the hammering of it. And the subject and object get all mixed up at the end there.
Well, let's do our best to kind of go through this thing a little systematically, as it were. And I always know at the start, the unpurged images, that's the one my students are always, they ask, does he mean images of poetry, the kinds of images we encounter in poetry, and what would it mean to have an unpurged image? And this often gets us started talking for at least a half an hour, if not more, about poetry and inspiration and that sort of thing. And before we know it, we're well on our way, and we're not even talking about the poem anymore. So maybe if you could start there, what you think about that, what the unpurged.
That's an interesting question your students are asking. It reminds me of the part where Yeats says that art is but a vision of reality. And you can ask the same question. Okay, what does the vision of reality as opposed to reality mean? And if the unpurged images are receding, then are the images in the rest of the poem purged? or is this about purging? Is this an act of purgation happening? Is this like being in purgatory?
Mhm.
You know, or are these images kind of on the other side? I mean, there's lots of Dante, obviously, in
Yeah,
this poem, you know,
yeah.
and
The sleeve line, I think that's a Dante
yeah,
reference
yeah, these
there.
flames, yeah, the flames begot, yeah, the flames that the people that are in flames that are never. Although that's also from a no drama, you know, there's a famous no drama.
Who's the person in the drama in the play is causing
Yeah,
their own pain, right? Is that the idea?
yeah. The play's called Moto Mizuka. I wrote it down, and it's about yeah. There's a spirit in the afterlife who is encased in flames and tormented forever. But if she could forgive herself,
Mhm.
then the flames would go away. But she can't ever forgive herself. So she's.
Mhm.
You know, it was a really striking image for Yeats and for me. Um,
So we're in this.
yeah,
I'm not sure where.
so we've got. It's almost as if, you know, you've got day with its things and night with its things, and yet they're all images.
Mhm.
It's not as if there's something in the day that is outside the mirror on mirrored show, you know, that is images here. And that sense of things going around and round also reminds me of all the repetition in the poem. I taught this last week, and the first thing one of my students said was, man, look at all of those repeated words. There's a really pretty small vocabulary here with words used 2, 3, 4, 5 times.
Mhm.
And then variations on those words.
Mhm.
Um,
And certainly the first one, image, is right there. I mean, we get that over and over again in the poem.
yeah, exactly. At the beginning of the poem and at the ending of the poem. And we have unpurged at 9:1, and we have torn and tormented in the last
Mhm.
line, line 40.
I have in my notes
So,
here, and God, who knows when the heck I wrote these. I often take this copy with me when I go to the Yeats Summer School. And so I have notes from years and years of lectures. And I have a gloss here at the start, the unpurged images, and I have next to it, humans entering transition, where they will go unpurged and become shades and become purged. And I don't know if that's, I don't know who was talking or who said that, but that's another, I guess, interesting way to think about the poem. And then if it's, so in one sense, maybe it's about poetry and the relationship between poetry and reality and vision. And then a different level, maybe it's about, well, as Yeats talks about, the vision of the afterlife. But so then in which case humans as images, right? But I,
yeah.
I don't know if that,
Right.
does that make sense to you? I'm not sure if
Right,
that.
because if you ask what's the setting of the poem, we're in Byzantium
Mhm.
at midnight. And so that we're clearly in a place that is liminal, in a place that is
Mhm.
sitting right. And this is where vision, I think, is helpful, is that you're in a place where the forces that go in one direction are equally balanced. Although balance is the wrong word because there's no balance here, but they're equally matched
Mhm.
by opposing forces that are going in the other direction. So you have the life forces and the death forces
Mhm.
pushing against each other in this place that is neither and both.
Mhm.
And it's kind of in between life and death.
Mhm.
So that the speaker who is here seems like like Yeats is in between life and death too. This is not sailing to Byzantium,
Mhm.
where the poem, the title of the poem suggests you're on your way there. And then the
Mhm.
poem says, I have sailed the seas and come, here I am looking back. This is, in the middle of something that can't be controlled. There's a sense of of just everything escaping any kind of semblance of control in the poem. Although it's very, it's very controlled. Like, Sailing to Byzantium, I think that's another reason I chose this poem, is that Sailing to Byzantium is so sort of, it's so controlled. It is in, perfect 4 stanzas, ottava rima, everything matches up. And in this poem, things join up, but they don't really, it's not neat.
So the rest of that first stanza,
So,
we've got our drunken soldiery, we've got the night walker's song. Maybe I've seen that glossed as referencing prostitutes.
yeah, there's an early manuscript that basically makes it clear that these are prostitutes, and then it kind of, he sort of dials the language back into night walkers, which also I suppose is more appropriate given that they, everything here is walking at night. But but the soldiers are asleep. I suppose the prostitutes who go along with soldiers are asleep. You almost start with a little bit of almost normalcy, here's what it really looks like, to kind of get you into it. Among School Children does the same kind of thing. I'm in a schoolroom, and even a poem like The Second Coming, starts with a kind of sense of, here I am and I don't really quite understand what's going on. And then you have this vision in the second part of the poem.
Really interesting. I think that makes a lot of sense. This scene setting where we could be in a reality. I mean, we can imagine a sort of ordinary reality.
Yeah.
Sort of, okay, what would this mean to sort of walking at night in Byzantium, and thinking about the drunken soldiers asleep, the night walkers have gone to sleep, and hearing the cathedral gong, and then the starlit dome. I mean, these are all things one could imagine seeing.
Right. I mean, there is a cathedral and it does have a dome. On the other hand, a starlit dome is just the night sky. So the cathedral is kind of an image of that night sky, is the night sky an unpurged image in the cathedral of, already you're getting, a sense of the disdain for, what he says here, mere complexities, But yeah, I was going to say that the poem, does go in an orderly way through a series of images that Yeats knew he was going to link together from early on when he was writing this poem. I thought I would just read a note. Yeats often had a thing, as called, that he would do. He would start working on a poem by having a subject, and it would be a little prose thing. And so he had a subject, and he wrote it in a journal. And he says, describe Byzantium as it is in the system, that is in a vision, towards the end of the first Christian millennium. And then there's some lines crossed out. Then he says, a walking mummy, flames at the street corners where the soul is purified. Birds of hammered gold singing in the golden trees. In the harbor, dolphins offering their backs to the wailing dead that they may carry them to paradise. These subjects have been in my head for some time, especially the last. And people have said this before, but basically that's the structure of the whole poem. You've got a mummy, something that is a sort of a guide to the speaker, and the speaker hails this thing. And then you have a golden bird, which is obviously connected to the golden bird from Sailing to Byzantium. And then you have these flames, these spirits, who are dancing. There's also a dance going on a pavement, and then you have the dolphins that, as you know, are quite often represented in classical iconography as carrying souls from this life to the afterlife. And in News to the Delphic Oracle, another poem, there's a dolphin doing just that, carrying holy innocence. So we've got, he knew which images he wanted to put in here, and and sure enough, there they go.
In the second stanza, then we start with the kind of this weird mummy guide that initially floats before him as an image, then man or shade, and then we get all of this kind of vacillation here going on about what is this thing?
What is this thing? And there's the word image again, isn't it? Your students your students are just right to fix on that word before anything else. Yeah, and then of that strange 1, 2, 3, 3 more than 1, more 2 than 3, is repeated with a difference in the next stanza, right? Miracle, bird, or golden handiwork, more miracle than bird or handiwork. So these two things are connecting with each other. And so, yeah, do those two lines mean, is the speaker saying, before me floats this thing, I don't know what it is, and then I figure it out. It's a shade more than a man. Oh, it's more an image than a shade. Or is the speaker still confused at the end? I don't know what this is.
Right. Right. It's really difficult, and that's, you can read these. You really can read it multiple ways here simultaneously, and they all make grammatical sense if you.
Yeah, I mean, is this kind of, nitpicking? Well, is it a shade? Is it an image? Is it a, is it a soul? Is it a man? Or is it almost, there's a sense in which in this poem, you're close to kind of, the very thin line between ecstasy and hysteria.
Yeah.
By the time I never know quite how to read the last lines, spirit after spirit, is the speaker just overwhelmed with these expressions that don't have any verbs at all? But so, or is this still a kind of, description, here's what this looks like, and here's what I think it is. And then all of these learned allusions to Hades, bobbin, the things wound in mummy cloth, and that's all Platonic,
I always think maybe if you want to talk about that, but one thing I'll say, that third line is where, as I'm reading Byzantium, I always think, oh, this is a different kind of poem than for Hades, bobbin bound in mummy cloth. The alliteration is slippery there. You start feeling as if you're being carried along that line, but what he's describing, you have to really think about, because it's a Hades possessive bobbin. What does it mean to be? It's for Hades bobbin bound in money cloth. I'm trying. What is bound exactly? And then you have to think about the bobbin, and then there's a Platonic thing in the background. I know that maybe you can explain a little bit for people.
Right, bound and wound, and it reminds me of Among Souls Night, of course, where there mummies show up as well. Yeah, the sense of the cloth that wraps the human body being like
a bobbin.
Yeah, exactly, like a bobbin or a spindle. Which is connected, I think, also with cosmology, the planets that spin around things.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Huh. And then
Yeah, but you're right. Once you get to Hades, Bobbin, you realize this is no ordinary city.
yeah, and as I was saying, the sound qualities start to push forward, and you feel
Mhm.
like you're being swept along by the sound of the poem before you can sort of catch up with what the sense of things. And I feel that in this poem,
Mm,
that you're being propelled along. You sort of have to keep back. Where
yeah,
am I going here? Because immediately some of the alliteration picks up, and we get all of these sonorous qualities. May unwind the winding path. A mouth, I'm sorry, mouth that has no moisture, no breath, breathless mouths may summon a hail the human. I mean, we start moving along here, and we're getting
right,
all these images thrown at us.
right. And as you say, lots of alliteration, lots of assonance,
Lots of accidents, yeah.
and all that repetition, so that the repetition feels like it's winding,
Mhm,
as well.
mhm.
Do you know, maybe this would be a good
I was just
moment to
thinking
put
that,
up that.
because you had mentioned the drafts. Let me pull that up.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting.
Can you see
So
that?
yeah, I can see
Okay.
it. This is the first draft of the poem proper. And um, what's interesting to me is that at the top of the page, on the left, is the rhyme scheme.
Yeah.
AABBCDDC. So it's kind of ottava rima with a difference.
Mhm.
But also, do you see how the second B is a little bit further off to the left than the column of the first
All
three?
right.
So you got AAB in a vertical column, and then the second B is hitched over a little bit more toward the left margin.
God,
Then
this
the
is
C is
fascinating.
back again, and
So
then
he's
the two
matching.
Ds are toward the left margin again, and then
Yeah.
the final C is back in the middle of the line again. The B and then the two Ds are shorter lines. So you've got,
Right.
so another thing that's happening with the sound of the poem is that it sounds like it's going to go on in iambic pentameter, because our ears are so trained to
Mhm.
hear iambic pentameter. And then, these shorter lines sort of stop it. It's almost like the gong, they kind of just boom,
Huh.
pause the thing. Do you know what another poem that does this a little bit is uh, the Wild Swans that Cool?
Mm.
You have those shorter lines
Mhm.
in the middle
Mhm.
of the longer ones.
Mhm. I think that.
So after great cathedral gong
Hmm.
stops, there's a pause there.
That's really fascinating. So that means he had worked out. He hadn't just worked out the rhyme scheme. He kind of worked out the line lengths in advance.
Yeah, he'd worked out the whole form. And I think that's really interesting too about this poem, which seems to be pushing beyond form. That is probably one of the things that really catches me all the time about this poem. And yet he's working from form.
Mm.
He's starting with form, and
I was going to say that at the start. One of the things I was thinking about when you and I were talking initially about why you chose the poem and why it's such a strange poem. For me, it's a poem that feels, I mean, as if it's a surrealist or expressionist poem, which isn't something I usually associate with Yeats. And it
yeah,
feels like it's formless. And yet, look at in the draft. I mean, it is so, as always with Yeats, form is so important. It's so, there are no accidents with his decision
yeah,
about form. And that's really fascinating.
yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, yeah. Such a,
And yet, you know, well, we're not to the last. We're not to the last
all right, well,
stanza
let's
yet.
get into, where are we?
Where
This is
where
like,
are we?
this is like what happens when you talk about this poem. You can't help
You keep going
spiraling
around.
and winding and unwinding here. So okay, so we've got the
Right.
shade.
And what is this thing? Death in life and life in death. I don't know what that means, but it's certainly wound up in itself.
Yes, and wounding and
Is
unwinding
and
the
people
two.
talk about, oh, is this Heraclitus, who talks about, and Yeats talks about Heraclitus things living each other's death and
Mhm.
dying each other's life. Um,
And this is a core idea and a vision, of course, right? This winding.
Yeah. The sort of the windingness, but also the opposition of contraries. You know, the energy that comes from contraries that are in opposition. And I do think that that is part of what's happening at the end.
Right. That energy of antitheses.
Yeah.
It's
but I don't want to get there yet.
Okay, let's not go there. Okay. So
Okay.
the next stanza we have our bird that harkens back, as you said, to the ending of Sailing to Byzantium.
Right.
But again, that triad at the start, like sort of what
right. And then, and then the bird has a place here, but the bird ended Sailing to Byzantium, and it just becomes a kind of, second iteration of something strange here. It is an obviously artificial bird, something made, something hammered out of metal that is sitting in a tree that is also hammered out of metal. And it can crow. The cocks of Hades is a reference to the crowing of something that crows in eternity, as Yeats says in another poem. The cock crows when a spirit dies and is carried over somewhere to beyond this life. Or embittered by the moon, it can scorn common bird or petal.
I think that the second part, the scorning, makes a kind of sense. We've seen this before in in say a poem like The Dolls or
yeah, I was just thinking that The Dolls is exactly this kind of thing.
Yeah, so
and we've seen that we had the scorn here harkens back to disdain in the first stanza.
Right.
The artifice looks down on the natural.
Which is interesting, because at the end of Sailing Byzantium, the bird is this kind of plaything of the emperor, and now the bird is the golden bird, disdaining all of humanity in its kind of permanence versus our complexities of fire and blood, which is a fantastic way of talking about the human body as a complexity.
Right, you really do sort of feel about that it's hard not to read back that Yeats had nearly died.
Yes.
Right before he wrote this poem, so that the fragility of his body with the blood flowing in it, must have been in his mind an awful lot.
I hadn't thought about that, but that makes so much sense, doesn't it? The ways in which, when we are seriously ill, how we become conscious of our bodies.
Yeah. The body is easy to forget if you don't have some kind of challenge to it.
And then so
and it's not only the complexities of the human body, it's the complexities of anything that's alive.
A common bird or petal. Yeah.
Right? Any animal or plant.
Even the plants. So why is the moon and why is this bird embittered by the moon?
I don't know.
And moon's all over a vision, so
the moon is all over a vision. I'm not sure that this is the kind of symbol you can just track down. Not that you can really track down any symbol, but I think it clearly is linked again. So sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just saying it's exactly the kind of moment. Yeah. What I was saying earlier, when you sort of go to a vision, you're like, okay, this is going to help me out.
Yeah, this is whatever a vision is going to do. It's not going to really simplify matters.
But I interrupted you. Go ahead.
It's going back to the first stanza. We've got a moonlit dome. So we've got, as always in Yeats, this word picks up on the traces, and I suppose in other poets too. It has traces of the previous uses of this word that adhere in it, as if the heavens the stars and the moon, and these larger cosmic forces are mocking the things that are alive
Mm-hmm.
down on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Its name is not just blood. Mire is a pretty strong word.
Yeah.
What the speaker is and what the readers are is mud. We are abject
Yes.
looking on this other place.
Yeah. That's how it's really, it is so, that's what the way this poem hits you, where we have these kind of stylized images, and then this sort of word that conveys its sort of baseness and like physicality at its most basic. I mean, think of our bodies as constituted by mire.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's
right, exactly. Love has pitched his mansion in the place of excrement.
He's
just finished writing Crazy Jane poems.
Okay.
At this point too.
And then we get the flames in the next.
Now we get the flames, with this amazing alliteration.
Mm-hmm.
At midnight on the emperor's pavement, flit flames that no faggot feeds, nor steel has lit. And the flit and lit mirror each other with a slight difference. And the pavement, the emperor's pavement, that he was reading a lot of books about Byzantium.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a place called the Emperor's Pavement, and it was in the city, in the square that was in front of Hagia Sophia, the cathedral. And it was called the Emperor's Pavement. In a book, this book by Holmes that he read about that age. And he changed it to be the Emperor's Pavement. I don't know that there's, and the Emperor is reappearing.
Mm-hmm.
There has been mentioned twice,
mm-hmm.
And then is mentioned again in the next stanza. So I'm not actually sure what to do with the Emperor in this poem at all, to be honest.
I don't know either. I'm kind of, I was thinking about steel too, nor steel has lit. Is that an allusion back to the soldiers?
Or
reference?
Yeah, or just the way that people lit things before matches. You
like, did you use steel? I don't know.
Strike things against a steel, I think.
Huh.
I don't know, but the point is that, this is when we really get Dantean, as we were saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's midnight, and somehow on this actual physical pavement that belongs to the hierarchical organization of this whole place, that has an emperor at the top, and the emperor, of course, has two natures, right? Has a human nature and also a divine nature, mm-hmm. As kings did. Mm-hmm. And so emperors in the mosaics that are on the walls of these churches that Yeats had seen in Ravenna and in Palermo, mm-hmm. In Sicily, have an emperor, but then he's got a halo around mm-hmm. his head, because of course he's divine, mm-hmm. Because the status of being an emperor is divine. Mm-hmm. As well as being human. So that may be part of what, now that I think about it, is going on with the emperor. But yeah, there's this real place, but along it, we're no longer focusing on mummies in a way which are uncanny enough. Mm-hmm. Walking mummies that have no breath in their mouths, but the mouths are summoning the speaker. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now we have flames that seem to envelop blood begotten spirits.
Mhm. And this is the
And
point at which we get that purgation going on here, right? As you're
yeah,
saying, this is the most clearly with, I mean, the allusions here, I think, to the I think that's from the Purgatorio, that when
right.
Virgil's talking to Dante about the flames of the purgatory, that they can't burn your physical self.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
These are
I
sort
mean, Christian purgatory isn't the only major world religion that has the idea of purgation associated with burning
of. Mhm,
in the afterlife. It's a pretty common notion,
mhm,
as we saw with the no drama. I mean, that's from Buddhism.
mhm,
Um, that yeah, but yeah, this and it's agonizing.
mhm,
The blood reappears. Begotten is an interesting word that is going to be mirrored in that last stanza.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and complexities is also here reiterated.
mhm,
Part of what is being purged out, being burnt out, um, is complexity, which is a strange thing for a poet who's really interested in philosophy to
mhm,
to
mhm.
be yearning for. There is a yearning for this kind of purgation, as well as a repulsion of, an aversion to it. Nobody
Mhm.
wants to have this happen to you, and yet you do. I mean, that's again, in Dante, the spirits are all really happy to be
Mhm.
undergoing all this
In the-
torment in Purgatorio because they're on their way to heaven.
Right, that's
They're
right. Only a
the
couple, only 10,000 more years.
I know,
Stone,
right?
carrying stones around, or whatever's
Yeah,
happening to them, right?
yeah, exactly. Um, the and the dance is also interesting. The agony of being in a dance that you can't stop.
Mhm.
We've seen dances like that before in Yeats too, even from the stories in the 90s.
Yes.
These supernatural dancers.
And then
Um,
we get that in his late, I mean, even and then in his plays in the 30s, of course. I mean, all of his plays often feature, of course, dances, but some of those
yeah.
later plays, that sort of the figure consumed in this kind of dance that is an agony, that is trance-like.
Hmm.
It reminds me too of the No play you were referencing, the person sort of captured in their own
Right.
sort of dancing agony that they can't break out of, if they would
That they
only
can't. Yeah,
stop
and there is
believing.
dancing. Yeah, in that. Yeah, exactly, in that play.
I think too,
Um,
Meg, when you mentioned it earlier, one of the things that our conversation's really getting at, or prompting me to think about way more than I had ever done before, is the fact of Yeats having gone through this life-threatening illness, and that awareness of that in those lines, starting to think about someone who's gone through that
mhm.
experience, and how the feelings of beginning to die, the process of dying, and
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
the,
I
the
several of those plays. Alex Poulain pointed this out to me years ago, and I've thought about it ever since. Um, it's interesting to look at the points in Yeats where he's standing on the threshold of death. That threshold
yeah,
is of interest to him in a number of the works in the late period. Um,
and the tone of this part, as you were saying earlier, there's a sort of longing for this, an
I
ecstasy,
think
maybe.
so. I think so. I think yeah, I feel a longing
Mm,
here, and a kind of urgency, dying into a dance, an agony of trance, an agony of flame. There's maybe unwillingness, as well as inability to let this go.
mm,
An agony, an agony.
mm. And
And
that,
then it kind of breaks, it breaks itself, I think, in the last stanza. You got two things that aren't even sentences. I always tell my students, I would circle this in my little red pencil. Where's the verb? you know, um,
Right.
There is a verb in the second one. The
There's a,
Smithies break the flood.
well, that's the Wendler one too, right? She talks about what's getting broken here. So there's
Yeah.
like the flood, the
Yeah.
marble.
And
to-
yeah. And there's, yeah, what's getting broken? And then to what degree are the last three lines objects of that verb?
of that verb bitter,
You
yeah.
know, and we've
So
got that verb twice, right? The Smithies break the flood, the golden smithies of the emperor. Then marbles of the dancing floor break bitter furies of complexity. So is that a parallel sentence in
mhm.
which Smithies is occupying the place of marbles of the dancing floor? What's the relationship between the golden smithies and the marbles of the dancing floor? Are these images? We're back to images. Are these images of smithies? This is why I got so hung up on golden smithies in the last couple
Right.
of weeks. What is a golden smithy? Are these images of smithies? Obviously, on one level, the smithies are, you know, places where you hammer out metal and create images.
Mhm.
And in Byzantium, the houses of the silversmiths were around this emperor's pavement. So there's a sense of there's a sense of there being smithies here because there's all of this metal work going on. And you know, it could be just a transference so that they are presented as golden because they hammer gold. Although, yeah, and you know, one of the other things I was thinking about apropos gold, the way that quite often in early Yeats, poetry is something almost sewn, you know, it's stitched, it's a coat with embroideries, it's put together in a kind of gentle way. And feminized, of course, also, you know, in the textile work is often, and that's repeated. I mean, that's replaced by a lot of forging of things in the late work. Stuff gets hammered in the late work. The
Right.
making of art is, I mean, it's kind of uber masculine, but it's also the sense of its difficulty. This is hard. This is work against a material that is difficult to make malleable. So yeah,
I think that's right. And this kind of the labor of, so in some ways we're back to what we had at the start. Like this is in some ways a poem about poetry, about the generation of images and how they're forged. And here it's not the stitching and unstitching. Here it is this kind of breaking, in which case we got the smithies and then the marble floor. With the interesting parallel, right? Because smithies were golden. And then the marble, which are different sort of hardnesses, I guess, right? Very different. So the marble floor, like things, that's why the ending's so strange, like things breaking somehow against the marble floor, right? Or is the marble floor somehow breaking these things, or the marble floor, as you're saying, like a kind of stand-in for the smithies?
Right. I mean, it's clear that you've got artificiality and artifice on the one side, as you say, the making of art. You've got things that you make metal work out of, and a beautiful stone that is inlaid. You know, if you've ever seen these gorgeous stone floors in places like Sicily, you know, we've got you know, that we're back to that statement by Goethe that Yeats said all the time. Art is art because it is not life. You know, art on the one side, and then on the other side are furies of complexity, which was interesting. I in one of the manuscripts, these furies were stupid, aimless furies,
Hmm.
They were also bleak, aimless furies. They were also foul and at one point loud. And then they were blind,
Huh.
where blind images can yet blinder images beget.
That's so
So the complexities and the fury and the miry that are nature
yeah.
in this kind of abject way, and they are being broken,
Yeah.
right? They are being broken by the art.
By art.
And
Yeah.
but then they beget and beget and beget. I mean, you know, those images sort of don't give up.
Mhm.
Um,
That's fascinating because then it links, so images link back to, of course, the unpurged images of the start, but images then as on the side of the natural life, organic life, then generating and generating, right?
yeah. Are these images of natural life? I mean, because
Just,
beget is a strange word to
yes.
use with regard to image. I mean, if you think back to sailing to Byzantium, you know, begotten, born, and dies is only in the first stanza,
You know, I think that,
replaced by the passing of time that doesn't have anything to do with begetting.
I mean, this really helps me, I think, actually, as I'm thinking about why my students were so interested in that images at the start, because the images usually we think of as being on the side of artifice. I mean, it's a word we associate with the creation of poetry, right? Like it's like
Yeah,
poets offer us images. And that you were saying that right at the outset, like images versus what? And but here in what we're seeing, it seems like the images are on the side of the unformed organic complexity of all that mire and messiness, right?
yeah,
And have to get purged. And that,
yeah.
but life keeps going on. The messiness of human existence keeps going on. We keep
Keeps going on.
getting
I mean,
more
there's
and
this.
more.
Oh, I was gonna. So there's a passage in a vision that I was gonna talk
Let's
about.
get that.
So
You're the vision person, so somebody's
here we
better,
go. Here
somebody
we
better
go.
give us
Through
a passage.
visions. Right, right. And this is just after the famous passage where he says, "I think if I could be given a month of antiquity and leave to spend it where I chose, I would spend it in Byzantium." Um, well, it turns out that period is associated with one of the phases leading to phase 15, which is
Right.
the most subjective phase, the phase where
Face of creation.
um,
Right?
yeah. So if then on the next page he says, if I were left to myself, I would make phase 15 coincide with Justinian's reign,
Hmm.
that great age of building in which one may conclude Byzantine art was perfected. But the meaning of the diagram may be that a building like St. Sophia, where all, to judge by the contemporary description, pictured ecstasy, must, unlike the declamatory St. Peter's, precede the moment of climax. Of the moment of climax itself, I can say nothing.
Yeah.
Or what followed from I cannot from phase 17 to 21, almost nothing, for I have no knowledge of the time. So this is not the phase where there is ecstasy and climax, which is of course also a sexual term, as is ecstasy. And then he says, and he's just talking about history, you know, of the moment of climax, you know, when these forces are at their apex, I can say almost nothing. But I thought, you know, in a way, he can't say it in a vision, but he can say it in the poem.
That's interesting.
Do you know, this is the moment about which you know, the mind cannot be in control of the other forces. And what does that mean for the kind of poem that can express that place?
I think that makes a lot of sense, that poetry is doing something here that he can't do elsewhere. That this can only be done in poetry, right? And it's gesturing toward some state, some way of thinking that seems to be at the boundaries of language, the boundaries of imagery, like pushing. in some ways the most.
Yeah, that's what I think. Yes, just what you said, that it's pushing you're right up to the edge here.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is as far as it can go.
yeah.
You know, I mean, it's not like Eliot's raid on the inarticulate, you know, in the four quartets, but it's because it's not really a raid on. But it's being in.
Mm, mm.
Um,
Maybe that's why we sort of understand that ending, that the dolphin torn, that gong tormented sea. It always resonates with me, and I feel as if on some level I understand it, but I don't as well. I mean,
yeah,
intellectually, rationally, it's
it's
difficult to understand, but it's sort of the human, the embodied, the dolphins on the side of like bodies, the mire of complexity, and the gong maybe on the side of artificiality. Um, those two things sort of brought together in this
yeah,
kind of state of flux
right,
and tension, right?
right. There's a flood
Mm,
of something, maybe of images, but or a sea
hmm.
that, as you say, is torn by dolphins, which emphatically are natural creatures,
Yeah.
um, and yet the dolphins are pictured in art. That's, you know, and they are natural creatures, but they also transport the human soul from one world to the other.
Hmm.
So they exist at this liminal place too. And the gong, you know, um, also strikes midnight, which is this liminal moment.
Mm.
Um,
So
yeah, and
you
you're not
imagine.
really sure whether, you know, whether there's a, you know, what, it's almost like the energy flips, you know. They're being broken, but then, as you say, they keep recurring.
I think, maybe,
Who's breaking?
I think I maybe read this somewhere when you were talking about a vision in one of someplace where you're dealing with a vision where, this idea of antitheses we get in the vision were always, I'm not quoting you here, but it just sort of the way I remember it as being really important for me when I was first studying a vision, that it's about this kind of continual interplay, right, as
Yeah,
opposed to
yeah, yeah,
settled sort of binaries. And that's I think what what you're saying here, because and I think I came up with a little bit too neatly there with the golf and gong thing, but you're saying like the two are sort of, each is of the other, and each
mm,
itself is kind of liminal, right? Um,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's a good way to.
Yeah, I hadn't actually, you know, put my own theory onto the last line of the poem before, but yeah, but I do think you're right. And you see this in Yeats in the 30s.
Hmm.
Yeats in the 30s tries to be confrontational. You know, the energy is in the conflict.
Hmm.
You know, neither side is the right side. The energy is in
That's it.
the
Yeah.
fraught relationship between the two, always.
I suppose that thinking about that agony of the dying into a dance, the agony of trance. I keep coming back to what we were talking about initially with him, the experience of being close to death, and that those right to the end, that energy of contraries. I mean, to the very end of
Yeah,
one's
yeah.
existence, experience,
And winding. I mean, you
and then
know,
yeah,
a dance is a winding thing.
yeah, yeah.
There's the movement. It's so energetic. There's so much movement in that last stanza.
Like, yeah, yes, and
You
the
know,
hearing and the
it's
sounds and everything just sort of, yeah, that there is a kind of flood in the end, right?
yeah, yeah. There's a kind of a flood, a propulsion,
Yeah.
you know, and yet Yates has a very strong and powerful sense of that, of the resonating last line. And
Mhm.
this line does resonate with closure,
Well,
even though you don't know what it means. I don't know what
yeah,
it
I
means.
know, and I think I think this as we talked about this poem, I really liked the way we've talked about this poem because it's such a poem that spins off in so many different directions, and it's not the kind of poem where I think one would want to go through and just say, okay, we're going to systematically sort of have
Yeah,
one, interpretation here. I think this is pushing in so many different directions, but ultimately is the sort of effect of the poem that both of us, I think, seem to we
Yeah,
get.
we have both said that this poem works on us powerfully, even though, and I think maybe people like us are I don't know about speaking for you, but people like me, I there's part of me that gets very nervous when a poem won't let me master it,
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
with all the gendered implications of that term. I want to be in control.
Mhm.
And I want to understand it. I want to interpret it. I say, oh, art escapes me. Oh, art is meant to escape us. Art is not meant to be colonized. And oh, I don't believe that teaching is about just passing down
And
answers,
passing down
but to inspire. And yet, when I'm faced with a poem like this, it's hard for me to not think, oh no, I can't talk about this poem because I don't know what it means.
Well, I think you're really this is great. You're really daring, I think, to do this because this is a poem that is so. There's some Yeats poems I think where there are a lot of Yeats poems I think where you can they're more, all of these poems offer or can generate multiple interpretations, but
Yes.
there's a kind of some with many of them there's a sort of, okay, I can follow this line of interpretation. Everything sort of makes sense as you're moving through. And this one, it's in the nature of this poem that it defies any kind of linear, I think, interpretation. But I really like the kinds of associations you were getting at and the connections. I'm going to think a lot more about Yeats's own, and I knew this about A Winding Stair, but just really think about, Yeats has just gone through this profound illness. And thinking about how the way in which that emerges in the poem and all of these resonances and connections, particular words that then continually get sort of redefined. And that last part about images sort of being more on the side actually of the organic, which is so strange, but I think it helps understand what's going on sort of, or at least it's one way into the ending. Anyway, we should stop.
Anyway,
that was a lot of fun.
This was great. Thank you so much.
Nice talking to you.
Okay, you too.
Take care.